Today we're going to be taking a look at a pair of controllers from today's sponsor GameSir with the Collide and the Collide Flux. Now, these are both wired controllers designed to be used for Xbox in mind. They are officially licensed by Xbox, though they can also be used with a Windows 10 or 11 PC. Now, if looking at these controllers you think they basically look the same, there's good reason for that. I mean, aside from sharing the same general name lineup with both being called the Collide, these are 95% the same controller. There are some important differences between them. That 5% does matter, and we'll talk about what those differences are. But for the most part, I'm going to be going over both these controllers basically as though they were the same single line one, and we'll get into what the differences are between these two variants. If you've seen any of my controller reviews before, you'll know the general gist here. We're going to talk about the button feel, texture, grip, all that good stuff, how the controllers just generally feel and perform, and then we'll dive into some of these special features available on both these controllers. And so to begin with, let's start with just the general controller shape and grip. Now, looking at this, it's pretty immediately recognizable that this has a similar general body design as Xbox One controllers. There's some very light differences here, but the general idea here is the same. Button layout, grip design, all pretty similar. One choice on this that I do appreciate is that they've gone for a clear, glossy plastic design for the front of it to showcase the inside of the controller, which is something I always love. And a problem I've ran into with these kind of designs is that the front gloss looks really nice, but doesn't always really feel great to the touch, especially if you ever apply that to the grips of the controller. It's just texture that doesn't really work out well for long-term playing times, and if you have sweaty hands, can get very slick and awkward feeling. So they've gone with this glossy texture just on the main body right here for the looks, which I enjoy, but then changed to a more traditional matte plastic closer to the front of the grip here and on the back grip. So where your hands are actually resting and holding the controller feels like a more traditional matte plastic, which is a good thing. Now, speaking of that clear design, that is one of the aspects of these controllers that are different. While they both feature the same kind of plastic for the main body and being able to see through the gloss, as well as having lights built in, the default setting for the lights is a little bit different, with the regular Collide focused on a rainbow effect, with the Collide Flux going for this gold look, which matches with the gold detailing on the D-pad and shoulder buttons as well. And then the actual design of the boards inside looks different, which is much more noticeable once the lights are on. In the case of the Collide, it has a more traditional PCB design, lots of hard, strong lines, whereas the Collide Flux has this kind of Damascus design to it, where it's various little flowing lines and ridges for a bit of a different look. Now, as far as buttons and sticks go, this is actually where one of the other chief main differences between these controllers comes in, is in the D-pad and front-facing buttons, where the Collide has a clicky feedback design, whereas the Collide Flux goes for a more traditional mesh button approach. Now, me personally, I'm a big fan of clicky, especially when it comes to front-facing buttons. I can go either way on D-pad. I think there are benefits to doing a clicky D-pad, but also benefits to sticking to a more traditional mesh design, especially for things like rolling inputs. But when it comes to the ABXY buttons, the regular Collide, I love that clicky feedback on the main buttons, whereas on the Collide Flux, again, you're having that mesh design, so it's something that feels more like a traditional first-party controller, maybe just a little bit crisper in comparison, and the D-pad has that very natural kind of light mush feeling to it that is actually a good thing to have on D-pads, while the Collide, again, has that clicky feedback for each of the four directions. All the other buttons and sticks feel basically the same across these two controller designs. The sticks have a kind of tension that is a little bit looser than I generally prefer. I do want something that has a bit more fight normally, but it's not bad. The stick does have a pretty satisfying snapback, and I do really enjoy the particular stick head designs they went for these, where you have that lightly convex middle, but then there's a textured ridge around the head that makes sure that your thumb can stay nice and securely fastened if you're having some particularly hectic gameplay. Worth noting, the sticks on both these controllers are Hall effect sensor sticks, so if drift is a thing that you're ever worried about and you don't want to have happen, that cannot happen with these. These are Hall effect sticks, so drift is not a thing you got to be worried about, and both controller designs do feature an anti-friction ring, so when it comes to things like having to do spinning inputs on the controllers, it is a very smooth, gliding feeling that is nice. Shoulders and triggers are pretty standard. Worth noting that just like the sticks, the triggers in these are also Hall effect, which in the case of triggers, the benefit there is the accuracy of them. Very important for things like racing games. Any kind of game where varying pull distance matters, Hall effect just gives a certain degree of accuracy that is very nice to have on triggers. And then you'll also notice on the back that both these controllers do also feature remappable back buttons. With these, you're able to map whatever other button you prefer to it, giving easier access, particularly in those games where you're making use of both sticks consistently. You want to try to avoid using your thumb for anything else. Always handy to have an option to map some of your front-facing buttons to one of these back ones, giving easy access to your middle or ring finger depending on whatever style you like to hold the controller with. Now, you may have noticed looking at the front, we do have an additional button on these controllers. We of course have a share button, the menu and view buttons that are on Xbox controllers, and then this extra little M button right here. This is used for activating a lot of different immediate on-board controls that both of these controllers feature. One of those is of course being able to remap the back buttons to other things, but it can also be used for short keys in combination with the D-pad to do things like adjusting volume and headsets if you have any plugged into the aux port at the bottom here. You can also use it in combination with the stick to do some LED effect controls, like changing the brightness of them or swapping between different modes. It can also be used in combination with the triggers to activate a hair trigger effect. So like I mentioned earlier, because these are Hall effect triggers, that's a very useful feature for games where, variable pull distance matters, things like racing games. But if you're in a situation where you really just want it to read full pull as fast as possible because you just need that quick read, for instance, in things like first-person shooters, that's where a hair trigger mode is going to be very handy, because the moment you apply any pressure to the trigger, that's going to read as a full pull. So that is a mode that you're able to turn on and off through the controller directly whenever need be. Now, aside from all these different onboard special features, there are a number of things that you can also adjust in their controller app, GameSir Nexus. This is available on Windows as well as directly on Xbox, so it's not any kind of thing where you have to download it on a separate device and then plug the controller in to set it up when you want. If you're using this primarily with an Xbox, you're going to be able to access this stuff directly through the system, no problem. And this gives you a number of additional customization options for things like adjusting stick sensitivities in a variety of different ways. It also gives you more refined control over trigger sensitivities. So if you want something that's more responsive than full pull, but you also don't want to use the hair trigger effect, you're able to fine tune that in the app as well. You can customize different multiple profiles, which can also be swapped between immediately on the controller by hitting that M button in combination with one of the front-facing ABXYs. And you're also able to do more fine-tuned customization with the lighting effects. Instead of just swapping between the four main ones, you can do more specific designs based on your particular taste, and you have more refined control over the rumble motors of the controller. There are 4 total, 2 located in the low part of the handle, 2 located on the top on each side, and you're able to fine-tune how each of these rumbles works out. So if you have a preference of which ones you want strong or weaker, that's something you're able to adjust in-app as well. All in all, both Collides are solid options to use with your Xbox or PC. Again, the main primary difference between these is the designs of the boards, which gives just a little bit of visual variance between them, but more importantly, the fact that the regular Collide has that clicky feedback on the ABXY and D-pad, whereas the Flux is going to be something that feels like a more traditional mesh button. Personally, the regular Collide is a little bit more my style just because I like that clicky feedback, but if that's something you're not a fan of, or if you're really focused on D-pad, you don't want a clicky D-pad, that's where the Flux comes in as a good alternative option. If you're interested in grabbing either of these controllers, there are links posted down below in the description. I want to thank GameSir once again for sponsoring today's video showcasing these 2 different controllers. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know, subscribe if you haven't yet, and I will see you guys later.